Okay, hello everyone. We'll give people a minute or two to arrive, and I'll just check I've got everything set up whilst I share my PowerPoint. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. So today we're going through section 2 of the BMAT. And yeah, we'll essentially kind of go through what's included in section 2. Um, Sorry, I was just double checking something. Yep. What's included in section 2, the sort of common questions that can come up. So we'll have a go at about 2 questions per like subject. So I'll give you time to have a go at them, then we'll go through them together, and then we'll end with a bit of a Q&A at the end. So you can start putting questions in the Q&A box and vote for the ones you want to be answered, but I won't be going to them until the end of the session is all. I've got a raised hand. Is everything okay? Okay. So let's get going because we've only got an hour and there's quite a bit to cover. So yeah, in terms of resources, if you have queries, questions throughout the week, you can use the WhatsApp group, or you can also email the team at 6Med. So those are a couple of resources, and we'll go through some more resources later as well. So moving on. So yeah, here's our 6Med searchery on section 2 of the BMAT today. Okay, so who am I? I'm Victoria. Hi. Some of you would have met me last week at the section 1 surgery. So I'm a medical student at Oxford University, Oriel College if you want to get specific. Um, I've been doing admissions tutoring since I started university, basically. So God, that's over 4 years now, worrying how time flies. Yeah, and I do the BMAT, the IMAT, UCAT, and personal statement interviews as well. In terms of like my application process, obviously this was quite a few years ago now. So yeah, things have changed slightly. But I did biology, chemistry, maths as A2, and then I also did AS levels because I wanted to. My BMAT, I got 5.4, 6.3, and 3A. And then UK CAT, yes, when I did it was called the UK CAT, not the UCAT yet. And I got an average of 745. And then yeah, I got offers from all the universities I applied to. So that was Oxford, UCL, Imperial, which were all BMAT unis. And yeah, I also got offered a academic scholarship from Imperial. And then King's was my only UCAT uni, and it was my only MMI as well, but I got an offer from them too. So that's just a bit about me. Um, so yeah, we shall get going. And yeah, you can put your questions in the chat as we go, and then vote for the ones you want us to answer at the end. But yeah, I'll leave the general questions for the end, essentially. Another resource which is quite helpful is the Reddit group BMAT exam. So it's completely free, and there's lots of advice, and you can also like chat to other students who are applying to BMAT unis. It's used by about 1 in 2 BMAT candidates, so it's a really good place to look. And obviously, don't forget the 6Med resources as well. So have a look at the 6med.co.uk website, have a look at Reddit. Just make sure you're using all the resources that you have available to you, because any extra information is always helpful. And it's also helpful having places to go if, say, you don't understand why an answer is an answer, or why that's the correct solution. So you can ask people that and get their opinion, and hopefully they can help troubleshoot. And also within this Reddit community, there is an FAQ page, which kind of puts down like the basics of the BMAT, commonly asked questions. So you can have a look at those as well if you'd like. But as I said, there are loads of resources out there, including the 6med website. So it is up to you. I'm just giving you a couple of options is all. Okay, so what we'll go through today is essentially concise information. So going to give you some tips, tricks, sorts of common questions that come up in each topic. And then we've got a Q&A at the end, so answer your queries, and a question walkthrough. So the idea with that is I'll give you some time to have a go at the questions. Then after I've given you, well, so the exam would be about a minute, so I'll give you a slightly longer than that. I'll let you know when a minute's up though, so you can have an idea of your timing. Then I'll go through it and essentially show how I would approach the BMAT. So that just kind of will give you hopefully some ideas as to how to improve. And even if you get the right answer, it might give you some ideas as to, how to get to the answer quicker next time, which is also helpful. Okay, so some of the key things and dates to remember. So we've got our different sections. Obviously registration has already closed. The test date is the 18th of October this year. So that's something to obviously have in your diaries. And the UCAS deadline is the 16th. So those are very close together. If you can try and get your UCAS done as, sooner rather than later, so closer to the exam, you only really have to worry about the BMAT. So that's just something to think about. And then, yeah, so you will get results on the 24th of November. So that's obviously after your UCAS deadline. And I couldn't find the date for this year, but typically universities get access to it earlier than you do. So typically universities will maybe start shortlisting, let's say the week before that, because they get the scores directly. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And if you have a results inquiry or anything along those lines, the final date for application for that is the 1st of December. So you don't actually have that long between getting your results and if you want to make an inquiry about them. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. Yeah. Okay, so moving forwards. And yeah, in terms of our sections, so section 1 is thinking skills, which we tend to divide into problem solving and critical thinking. Critical thinking being your it's the ones with your paragraph, and then it's kind of about your understanding of English and your understanding of how someone writes something. So about assumptions, conclusions, reasoning, that sort of thing. And then problem solving kind of encompasses everything else. So that's your math-based problem solving, your spatial reasoning, essentially everything else that isn't like text-based, if that makes sense. And then section 2, which we'll go through today, is scientific knowledge and application. And that's 27 questions in 30 minutes. So section 1 is roughly 2 minutes a question. Section 2 is about 1 minute a question. So that's quite a big difference between the two. And that's something to keep in mind when you practice as well. Okay, so yeah, and then section 3 is obviously your essay, where you pick one to answer out of 3 choices. And the choices are normally philosophy, science, and medical ethics. And you get 30 seconds for that one. So 30 minutes for that one, not seconds. That would be incredibly unfair. Okay, so this is the distribution from last year for section 2. So I feel like section 2 tends to be more of like a standard distribution than section 1. And you can hopefully see that the majority of scores are between you've got our peak essentially from 3.5, 3.6 to 4.5. So that's kind of your middle peak, and then you've got tailing off either end. obviously what you need depends on the context of your application. So your other grades, and like the rest of your application in general, where you're applying, look at the BMAT in different ways. So some universities weight the BMAT differently than others. Like they'll add together section 1 and 2, and then maybe they'll adjust section 3, so on and so forth. So that's something to have a look at depending on your exact universities and the context of your application. Because for example, for Oxford, where they use GCSE results, if you've got really high GCSE results, you don't necessarily need as high in the BMAT, but then the reverse is also true. So I get lots of questions asking stuff like, what's a good score for dot dot dot? And the answer is always, well, it kind of there's no one good score. It depends on lots of other factors as well. It depends on the context of your application. But I'm sure I'll have some questions about that in the Q&A at the end. And yeah, this, I think I showed the same slide last week, but essentially this is just showing that like applications for medical schools are rising. And this year isn't included, but I believe next year there should be a rise in places. So that's something to keep it in mind as well. But essentially, the last however many years, applications have been rising, places haven't really. So that is something to keep in mind, especially when, you know, you're looking at like previous papers and previous years. And I'd also say when you're looking at previous papers and previous years, make sure you're looking at the distribution. Some years are easier than others. So get up the table like I showed you on the previous slide, get up the graph, have a look where you fall, and instead of saying, well, I did worse this time because I got 5, whereas last time I got 5.5. Well, maybe that year was harder, in which case, if you look at the percentages of people getting that, you might be in a similar position. So just make sure you're looking at your practice in context is all. Okay, so moving forwards, and yeah, just look at the BMAT as a chance to show your strengths. It might be that you do, 3 science A levels and you want to show that actually you're really quite good at essay writing too and thinking critically. Um, it might be that, you've got a skill for physics, but you don't do physics A level, so it's a time to show that off. So just think of it as a way of how can I use the BMAT to strengthen my application? And I think looking at it through that lens means you're more likely to do well than just getting caught up in, I have to get this exact number of marks. Okay, so moving on to like our question-based section. Some of the key things for section 2 is don't panic. In maths, for example, you might do your working out, use up your minute, and get to an answer, and then you're like, it doesn't match up with any of the options. If that's the case, don't get caught up. Kind of similar to those of you who have sat the UCAT, don't let one question throw you off timing for the whole section, because it's only a minute a question. So the thing to do is you get to that, just guess, move on. And the same even if you have a question and you're like, I don't know, I don't know even where to start. Move on. Make sure you're getting to the end of the section. Sometimes you might find that there's a nice question at the end, which is an easy mark, which you wouldn't have got to if you didn't do your like strict timing throughout. So I'd just say, especially for section 2, because of how tight the timing is, of like essentially a minute a question, I'd just say be brutal. If something's taking you too long, leave it, move on. Or maybe finish that question if, say, you're already ahead of time, but you've got to keep an eye on the clock the whole way through. And yeah, generally the maths questions probably take the longest just because there's like the most amount of actual physical working out. And then I'd argue probably like equation-based physics questions, or also maybe quantitative chemistry. Whereas some of the biology questions require you to have a deep understanding of the topic, but because there aren't calculations involved, it can be quicker. So that's something to remember as well, is when you're practicing, don't just go and do, only maths questions because they're probably going to take you longer. So you need to be doing practice kind of across all sections to kind of average out to a minute a question. And yeah, in terms of lack of planning, some questions can kind of be puzzles, or they give you extra information you don't need to try and throw you off onto another method which takes longer. Try to think in basic terms, what information do I have? What am I trying to get to in terms of information? And what method links these two? And get in the habit of thinking, what is the most efficient method of answering the question? Um, okay, moving on. Okay, so we're going to start with maths and work our way through to biology. So, so there are 6 questions for maths generally, and you've obviously only got just over a minute per question. The full specification can be found online at many websites, and you also don't forget that Cambridge Admissions does publish the Preparing for Section 2 guide, which also tells you all the content you need to know as well. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of like the main question types that come up, or the most common question types, I say you've got your algebra-based questions, which would just be something like simplify ... Geometry-based questions, which would be some are tend to have algebra involved in them. It will tend to be like there's an unknown side length, and you have to work it out algebraically. Or you could also have graph-based questions in your geometry as well. So don't forget about those. Statistics questions and probability are quite interlinked, and they can have slightly more similarities to some like probability problem solving questions as well. So keep an eye out for those because sometimes they throw them into section 2, but they kind of look similar to some section 1 questions as well. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, I believe we are now going on to questions. Okay, let me get my timer up. So the way this will work is I will put the question up on the screen. I'll let you know when a minute is up, so you'd know roughly how much time it would take in the exam, but I'll probably give you longer than that to actually have a go at answering the question because it will be more productive for everyone if you've had a go at getting to the answer instead of I stop you at a minute and then you don't get to the answer. I think last week I said to put your answer in the Q&A chat. Can we not do that this week just because then it means people can see? Oh, sorry, I don't know how that happened. It just means people can see the answer and they might still be working is all. So write down your own answer, keep it to yourself, don't put it in the Q&A chat because also that means it's difficult for me to find the Q&As for the end. So if no one has any question on that, I will, okay, have a go at this one here. Okay, that would be a minute, so I'll give you all a bit more time to finish up having a go with this one. Okay, so I'm going to start going through this one. Essentially, the way I'll do this is annotate what I would have as my working on the screen. Sorry, I just managed to spill my drink. Okay, just check in here. Okay, annotations. So first things first, yeah, this is one of the questions where I'd be confident of getting to the answer, but I think I would probably need longer than the minute just to do the algebra. So this sort of thing where you need to practice in mocks. If, say, I knew I was doing the biology questions in, I don't know, 30 or 40 seconds, I know that I have that extra time on, say, the maths questions. So you just kind of need to get a feel of how long you take for each question and whether or not that averages out to a minute. So just as a point ahead of this. Okay, so this is essentially your algebraic fractions. They're quite a common one to come up to simplify. So if it's like you haven't done in a while, I would practice. So the main thing is when I'm looking at the fraction on the right, I'm thinking, okay, well, can I factorize the bottom quadratic to get it to have a factor that's the same as on the top? So I'd factorize the bottom to 2x, oh, just 2x plus 1. 2x plus 1 times 2x plus 1. So I've just factorized this quadratic here. Now what I can do is I can essentially cancel those out. So I end up with 2 minus 1 over 2x plus 1. Now I still can't really simplify this because 2 isn't over the same denominator. So I'm going to rewrite this and put them over a common denominator. So I'm going to essentially rewrite 2 as 2 times 2x plus 1 all divided by 2x plus 1. So that hasn't changed the value because 2x plus 1 divided by 2x plus 1 is just 1. So you're essentially timesing 2 by 1. So that hasn't changed the value, but it does mean that I'm going to be able to combine these fractions. So I can now combine this because they share a denominator. So if we first expand out this here, I'd end up with 4x plus 2, take away 1, all over 2x plus 1. And then if we collect like terms at the top, you'd get 4x. Oh, I need to write that on the top. Sorry. 4x plus 1 over 2x plus 1, which would give me an answer of A. So I'll leave that up for a second if people are noting it down. But yeah, so as I said, this would probably take me longer than a minute, but I'd be hoping to average that out with other sections. Okay, so moving onwards, just keep an eye on the time. Okay, have a go at the next maths question. Have a go at this one here. Okay, that would be a minute, but I'll give you all some more time because you probably need longer than that for this question. Okay, so that would have been another minute just to give you an idea of timing. So I will start going through this one. So this is the sort of geometry question you tend to see come up in the BMAT. It's never normally as straightforward. Like I guess some of the graph ones are more straightforward. But it tends to be somewhat algebra based still. So that's something to keep in mind when you're revising or practicing as well. So the first thing I do with this is essentially think, okay, I'm trying to find the radius. So how can I divide up this triangle to actually help me? So we know it's equilateral, so we know each of these are 60 degrees. And we know that we can draw a radius onto here. So if I were to draw this and this, we know that our new triangle, these two lines would be the radius. See if I can get rid of that. Yeah. Okay, so thinking about that there, I also know I can divide down here and essentially create two identical right angled triangles. Yeah, so this angle here would be a right angle. This angle would be half of the 60 degrees, so that would be 30. And this angle here would also be 60 degrees. So I've now got two identical right angle triangles. I'm trying to find this side length. I can work out the side length here. If I make that X, I can work out QX or XR because it would be 10 divided by 2. So that would be 5 here and 5 there. Now, as I've got a right angled triangle, I can use Pythagoras or I could use trigonometry. So if I quickly just redraw the triangle bigger, so it's less confusing. So the first thing I do now is I would look at I would look at the answers, and you can see that they all use 60 degrees. So I'm going to make 60 degrees my angle theta, and I'm not going to worry about the 30 degrees. So if 60 degrees is my angle theta, and I've got the hypotenuse and the opposite side, I know that sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. So I can say that sine 60 equals our opposite, which is 5, divided by our radius, which is r. We want to find an expression for the radius. So I can rearrange this to say that our radius is going to be equal to 5 divided by sine 60, which would give you an answer of D. So this sort of question is a bit more problem solving-y, if that makes sense. So that is something to keep in mind. And yeah, when you see geometry questions like that, just start thinking, okay, I knew I needed to get to the radius, so I'll draw the radius on there and see where I can go from there. How can I link the information that I have, which is this side, and I know the angles to get to the radius? So hopefully that kind of outlines a method you can apply for those sorts of questions. Okay, moving on. Okay, so that's our two maths questions. So we'll now move on to a bit of physics, which I know is something that some of you will like and some of you will hate. So you'll have about 7 questions. Again, it's just over a minute a question, and you've got full spec online, but the stuff that tends to come up are waves, electricity always comes up, some mechanics, and also nuclear physics tends to come up as well. Less common topics are things like magnetism. Some of the thermal physics can come up in chemistry because there's kind of an overlap with like specific heat capacity, that sort of thing. Um, so that's something to think of as well. Just if you really don't like physics, try and focus on the high yield topics is what I would say. And in terms of high yield stuff for physics, memorizing the equations gets you a long way. If you like mechanics, for example, most of it is memorizing the equations. So that is something to keep in mind. Okay, so just like the maths, I'll give you a minute, let you know when that's up, but give you a bit more time to finish up as well, and then we'll go through together. Okay, so everyone ready for the example questions? Have a go at this one here for me. Okay, so that would be a minute, but I'll give you all a bit more time to finish up. Okay, so that would be our um, second minute up for this question. So I'll just start going through it. So as I said, you do need to know your equations for physics, otherwise you're going to be stumped on a lot of questions. Um, so the main thing to think of is we have our submarine and oops, very narrow. Give me a second. Okay, never mind. So we have a submarine and it sends out a wave. or a pulse, and then that hits an object and then it bounces back. Okay, so we've essentially got that distance and also that distance. Okay, so the first thing you've got to remember is that's what we are looking at. So we've been told that this distance is 70 meters, 750 meters, sorry. So the actual distance traveled by the sound is going to be 750 times 2 because it's going to hit the object and then come back. Okay, so that would be 1,500 meters. That equals our distance. We've got our time equals 1 second because it returns to the submarine 1 second after it was transmitted. So we know our speed equals distance divided by time, which we can also change that to velocity. It's up to you. So that equals 1,500 divided by 1. So that's 1,500 meters per second. So now we know we have our velocity. We've also been told our frequency. So the core equation for waves is velocity equals frequency times wavelength. We want to find out the wavelength, so we'd rearrange that to get wavelength equals velocity divided by frequency. So we can now use our values. So we'd have 1,500, sorry, yeah. Yeah, 1,500 divided by 6,000, which would give you 1/4. So that's 1/4 meters. So that would be 25 centimeters, giving you an answer of B. Okay, so that would be how I'd approach that sort of physics question, and I'd make sure I'm doing a bit of a diagram to understand what's going on. Okay, have a go at this one here for me. Okay, so that would be a minute. I'll give you all another 30 seconds to finish up. Okay, let's just go through this one because I want time for Q&A at the end. I am slowly working my way through some of the Q&As as well, so you can have a look on the answered section. So again, You need to understand a couple of principles for this, but mostly you need your equations. So, thing to remember is when you've got a movement essentially up and then down due to gravity, we're dealing with our kinetic energy and gravitational potential energy. So as the object moves up, you've got kinetic energy is being transferred into gravitational potential energy. And as the object moves down, you've got gravitational potential energy being transformed into kinetic energy. So the key thing to remember for that is the maximum kinetic energy, because we're assuming there's no energy lost in the system. We're assuming it's 100% efficient, essentially. And the maximum gravitational potential energy are going to be equal to each other. So we can use that to essentially answer this question. So I've got the gravitational field strength, G. We've been told air resistance is negligible, so we don't have to worry about that. And I've got a mass, and I've also got a height. So I can use my gravitational potential energy equals mass times G times height. So that would be 45 times 10 times 10, which would give you 4,500 joules. And we've said that's equal to our maximum kinetic energy. Yeah, sorry. So we know that's equal to our kinetic energy. So we can use our kinetic energy equation. So first things first, we can use that to get rid of the top three answers. So you're left with D through E. D, E, F. Our kinetic energy equation is kinetic energy equals half times mass times velocity squared. We also want to work out the speed or velocity. So I'm going to rearrange this and I get velocity equals the square root of 2 times the mass no, 2 times the kinetic energy, sorry, the kinetic energy divided by the mass, which if I substitute my values in, I'd get 2 times 4,500 divided by 45. I'm going to simplify that to get 2 times 100, which is the same as 10 root 2, giving you an answer of E. What I would say is these sorts of questions are pretty much a similar method. It's going to be these two equations for pretty much all of those sorts of questions. You need to decide, is this a force question or is this an energy question? So look for what information they've given you and see if that can guide you. As soon as I saw I've got mass, I've got height, I've got G, I'm thinking, okay, this is a gravitational potential energy question, and also one of the answers is in kinetic energy. So that also moves you towards that as a method. Okay, we'll move on to chemistry and biology. And I'll give you just a question to answer that, just because I want some time for Q&As at the end. So 7 questions for chemistry, again, minute per question. Anything on the chemistry spec can come up. It tends to be, you get like quantitative chemistry, so like amount of substance questions, qualitative chemistry, like in terms of identifying elements. You sometimes get like trends, so trends within groups, that sort of thing. And organic chemistry can come up as well. So let me get my timer and have a go at this one. Okay, so that'd be a minute for that one. So let's just go through it. Okay, so this is kind of your amount of substance question, essentially. So you've got to remember your mass and your number of moles and linking your MR. So if you start with the mass, remember in chemistry, our mass is in grams. So our mass of NH3 is going to be 3,400 grams. So that's the first thing I'm going to start with. Our MR is going to be 17, it tells us in the question. So the number of moles is going to be the mass divided by the MR. So we get 3,400 divided by 17, which gives us 200 moles. Then we have our essentially ratio, and you can see we've got 2 ammonia to 1 of our products, the diammonium hydrogen phosphate. So that's a 2-to-1 relationship. So our N of, I'm just going to write product because I'm not writing all of that out, is going to be 100 moles. Now we can work out the mass and then I'd apply the yield. So our mass of product is going to be the number of moles times by the MR. So I do 100 times 132, which gives me 13200 grams. However, we've been told we've got a yield of 80%. So I'm going to do our mass times by 80% or times 0.8, which would give you 1,560 grams. We want it in 3 significant figures, so that would go to 10.6 kg. Yeah, 10.6 kg, giving an answer of B. So again, that's just about knowing the equations, kind of understanding the steps needed and applying them. Okay, last chemistry question. Have a go at this one for me. Okay, so that would be a minute for that one. So the main thing with this is when you've got our monomer essentially, and that's becoming the polymer, you've got to remember that what's going to be breaking to form these extra bonds is the double bond. So in my notes, I'd say, okay, that's what I'm looking at. So I want a drawing that matches that. These don't match because you want essentially your 2 carbons in the middle. Like it doesn't match the right structure because we've got a methyl group here coming off one of the carbons. There's no methyl group here or here. These all have methyl groups. However, these have double bonds, which we've said the double bond breaks to form the other bonds. That doesn't work. So that gives us an answer of D. So you can just see how what they've done is broken this double bond, turns those into the link bond, and then you've got 1 methyl group and the rest are hydrogens. Okay, got 2 biology questions and then Q&A. I might just make it 1 biology question just so I've got some time to answer your questions. So yeah, biology, 7 questions. There's quite a large spec. What I would say is some things that come up that people tend to forget about because they haven't done them since GCSE are things like ecosystems and genetic engineering, and like inheritance and pedigree comes up a lot. So for biology, I'd focus your revision on the stuff you haven't done recently in your studies. So just make sure you're not missing out bits of the spec essentially. So have a go at this one here for me. Okay, so that would be a minute on this question. So the main thing with this is kind of quite a typical inheritance question. They don't often have just a single one Punnett square question. Normally there'll be a bit more thought involved than that. So I'd just start by working my way through the generations, then deal with the copies of the alleles at the end. So our first mating is between a homozygous dominant rabbit and a rabbit that did not have the condition. So that's homozygous recessive. So don't know why I wrote that out when I could have just wrote out R. So we're gonna have a Punnett square like this for our first cross. And you can see that all the offspring are heterozygous. Okay. Now our next cross is between one of these offspring, so heterozygous, and a rabbit that does not have a condition. So we've got heterozygous and homozygous recessive. And then work your way across. And you see now we've got 50-50. So in terms of the cells they're taking, they take a cell from, sorry, yeah, we've got a cell from both parent. We've got a cell from this parent here. So we've got one rabbit with RR, and then we've got the three offspring of this generation. So they are homozygous. So we're up to 5 copies of the allele, and then 3 offsprings from this generation. And they've said 2 have the condition. So 2 are heterozygous, 1 doesn't. So 1 is homozygous recessive. So we'd have this here. You can see that in total, we have 7 copies of the dominant allele. Okay, I'm going to quickly skip past the one question because there's another session being run after this. So I've got to answer your Q&As in a couple of minutes we have left. These are some of the resources that you have access to. And some of them are free, some of them are not. So have a look, see what you think would be helpful for you. I'm going to quickly go through the Q&As. In terms of formula sheets for maths and physics, I don't have one formula sheet. You can go through the spec and see essentially like there are formulas in the spec and you can pick them out if you'd like to. I'm sure people have created formula sheets online. I don't have just a specific one that I tend to use because I tend to go through it like as we're looking at the content. In terms of like generally good scores, what I would say is most universities do release their application data. So you can have a look online and they'll normally say like average score needed for an interview, and that can kind of give you a bearing as to where you are within that. I think for And also, if you're looking at those, double check you're looking at the right offer group, because you can have some people get contextual offers, some people don't. So double check that. So some places use a threshold, some places don't. Again, all that information is on university websites. So for the specific universities you're looking at, that's worth double checking. For example, Brighton and Sussex look at the essay more than other places do, so you can double check their weighting as well. In terms of high yield things to do for each section, practice, and then section 2, if you don't know the physics equations, learn the physics equations, would be my biggest high yield things to do. But practice would definitely be best. There's a recording of last session on the YouTube channel. In terms of old papers, I would skip the data analysis questions. As someone who did the paper when you had data analysis questions, they kind of really changed the timing, because you've got the time to read it, but then you have multiple questions on the same thing. So what I would do is I'd skip the data analysis questions and then just turn your score into a percentage and kind of compare that to if you had extra questions instead of the data analysis, if that makes sense. Other thing to say, if you're doing old section 2 papers, they like asterisks or put in red the questions which are no longer on spec. So keep in mind about those as well. It's kind of up to you if you just skip that or and change to a percentage, like I said for section 1. Yeah, I'm not going to answer questions about specific universities. All that information is on their websites or on many of the websites which collate them. So that's worth having a look at. Okay, in terms of timing, which we've spoken a bit about today, that would be the last question I answer, because there's another session that has to run exactly on the hour. Practice doing mocks and work out your timing. Work out which questions you do quickly, which questions you do slowly, and see if you're averaging them out. If you spend a minute and a half on every maths question, but you do every biology question in 30 seconds, you're fine. That will equal out. However, if you spend a minute on the biology questions and a minute and a half on the maths questions, you're obviously too far over. So what I'd say generally is, if you have a go at the question, use the full minute, don't get to the answer, I'd probably just guess and move on. If you're still working to the answer at the minute, but you might get to the right answer, have a look how you're doing for timing, and go from there. And I'd kind of have checkpoints throughout the paper. So when you're 9 questions through, are you 10 minutes through? When you're 18 questions through, are you 20 minutes through? And do that way. I will let you all go just because we've got another session that has to run using this Zoom link. So thank you all for coming. Hopefully that was helpful, and good luck with your admissions.